without a shadow of a doubt that Iran will take a nuclear weapon. They will use it to wipe our ally Israel off the face of the map, and they've stated they will use it against the United States of America.
Iran, 1953. The CIA mounted its first major covert operation to overthrow a foreign government. The target was the Prime Minister of Iran, Mohammad Mossadegh. He held power legitimately through his country's parliamentary process, and he was popular. Washington had once looked to him as the man to prevent a communist takeover. But that was before Mossadegh decided that the Iranian state, not British companies, ought to own and control the oil within Iran's own borders. When he nationalized the British-run oil fields, Washington saw red. The Secretary of State, John Foster Dulles, and his brother Alan, director of the CIA, decided with Eisenhower's approval to overthrow Mossadegh and reinstate the Shah of Iran. The mobs paid by the CIA and the police and soldiers bribed by the CIA drove Mossadegh from office.
Crown Prince Abdullah greets the Shah as he lands at Baghdad airport after a 7-hour flight from Rome.
The King of Kings was back in control and more pliable than Mossadegh. American oil companies took over almost half of Iran's production. U.S. arms merchants moved in with $18 billion of weapon sales over the next 20 years.
I believe very sincerely that the CIA is correct when they teach and talk about blowback. When we went into Iran in 1953 and installed the Shah, yes, there was blowback. The reaction to that was the taking of our hostages, and that persists.
Joining me now to talk more about this tragic event and also what it kind of signifies about U.S. policy towards Iran is Cyrus Safdari, independent analyst and blogger with IranAffairs.com. Now, Mr. Safdari, as Jihan just pointed out, this happened at a time when the U.S. was backing Iraq in a war against Iran, a country that many said, you know, was in an undeclared war against. Is this kind of an incident or an example of hypocrisy?
Well, it's one of the examples of many hypocrisies that have been going on, not just back then, but continue to this day. At the time, the United States was backing Saddam's use of chemical weapons against Iran as well.
Sanctions are not diplomacy, you say. They are a precursor to war and an embarrassment to a country that pays lip service to free trade. As for Iran's nuclear ambitions, you wrote this: one can understand why they might want to become nuclear capable, if only to defend themselves and to be treated more respectfully.
Now, let's switch over to sanctions, because this week we saw President Barack Obama sign into law the toughest sanctions against Iran, telling them they need to be an international player. They're not playing by the international rules. Now, when we look back at this incident of the Airbus, is this a double standard here?
Well, of course. I mean, his statements that Iran needs to play by the international rules, he doesn't specify what rules, because Iran is not in violation of any rules. Iran has the perfect right to enrich uranium in accordance with the terms of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. And in fact, Iran's nuclear program started with the assistance of the United States. It's not an illegal or violative program.
There was no sign of survivors in the Strait of Hormuz, where an Iranian airliner with 290 people aboard was shot down by a missile fired from an American ship. In Washington, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff confirmed the incident.
I don't think that most Americans even know that this happened. How do you think that Iran is portrayed in the media here?
Well, having lived in the United States both before and after the revolution, I can assure you that most Americans can barely find Iran on the map.
What do you think about, this specific incident, the anniversary from 22 years ago? I mean, is this something that still has relevance that people need to know about today?
People here have probably absolutely no idea that it ever even occurred.
And why is it important for them to know, or is it not? Is it irrelevant now?
Well, it's important to understand the context between the history of the two countries. Every day here we are bombarded by the latest Iran news. However, this news is never placed in any kind of context which would allow it to be understood. Instead, it's constant fear-mongering and scaremongering. And as a result, the Americans may know what's happened 20 minutes ago, but they don't remember what happened 2 years ago.
Mr. Kaine? Senator Santorum, I got a question for you.
Well, as the author of the Iran Freedom Support Act, which he is criticizing, because I authored it when I was in the United States Senate, the Senate would actually impose sanctions on Iran because of their nuclear program. Iran is not Iceland, Ron. Iran is a country that has been at war with us since 1979. Iran is a country that has killed more American men and women in uniform in Iraq and Afghanistan than the Iraqis and the Afghanistan has had. The Iranians are the existential threat to the state of Israel. You ask the Israelis, what keeps them up at night? It's the Iranians funding of Hamas and Hezbollah and the support of Syria.
30 seconds.
And the reason, hold on, let me finish.
There are rules here, sir.
Yeah, I know there are rules, and you guys have been giving these guys a lot of time and not a whole lot of time to me, so let me answer the question.
You have a question coming.
Okay, the senator is wrong on his history. We've been at war in Iran for a lot longer than '79. We started it in 1953 when we sent in a coup, installed the Shah, and the reaction, the blowback came in 1979. It's been going on and on because we just plain don't mind our own business. That's our problem.
How does this differ from the way that Iran is covered in other countries, or the way that Iran's policies are perceived internationally, maybe outside of the United States? Is it a different take?
I think, unfortunately, the United States, its media and the Western media in general are so dominant in the world that it's very hard to get an independent voice out there. This is changing, however, and especially with the internet, and especially with the rise of media organizations in other countries. So I'm thinking positively about this. I think this is going to change eventually.
Well, you mentioned that some of the incidents that I brought up were just, a few of the examples of many hypocrisies over the year. What are some of those that people may not know about or may not be aware about that you believe have been brushed under the rug, but that are nonetheless very important?
Well, I mean, we can go back quite a ways to 1953 when the United States overthrew a democratic government in Iran and reinstalled basically a tyrant who had been kicked out of the country by the people. During the war with Saddam Hussein, the United States was backing Saddam, had provided Saddam with chemical weapons components and targeting intelligence. Anyone who goes on the internet right now can see videos of Donald Rumsfeld, the former Secretary of State, shaking hands with Saddam Hussein at a time when Saddam Hussein was gassing the Kurds, and the United States attempted to shift blame for that onto the Iranians. We can come forward now and talk about their nuclear program, which, as I said, started with the assistance of the United States, and suddenly now the United States is telling Iran that it has to give up its rights under the Non-Proliferation Treaty, rights that it enjoys as a sovereign state. However, the United States is closely allied with countries which do have nuclear weapons and have refused to sign the same treaty.
Now, I'm guessing you're talking about Israel there, as far as countries that are believed to have nuclear weapons that are not signed on, whereas Iran is, and there's no proof that they have nuclear weapons.
Well, not exclusively.
Okay.
Not exclusively Israel. I mean, Pakistan, we know they have nuclear weapons. India, the United States carved out an exception on its own to the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which would allow it to cooperate in nuclear fields with India, even though this is a blatant violation of the NPT.
So why, in your view,
nobody in Iran can be fooled by this?
Why, in your view, then, is Iran targeted?
Well, there are a number of reasons why. Basically, what we have here is a third world country that dared to rise up and overthrow a U.S.-backed dictatorship. Now, if Iran can do that, then so can the people in Saudi Arabia, so can the people in other countries in which the United States is closely allied with the ruling governments. And this presents a threat to the, not just the U.S. interests, but to basically many interests. Israel's regional interests are endangered by an independent and powerful Iran as well.
And I can tell you, if Rick Santorum and when Rick Santorum is president, Iran will not get a nuclear weapon because the world as we know it will be no more.
Congressman Paul, 30 seconds.
You've heard the war propaganda that is liable to lead us into the sixth war, and I worry about that position. Iran is a threat because they have some militants there. But believe me, they're all around the world, and they're all around the world, and they're not a whole lot different than others. Iran does not have an air force that can come here. They can't even make enough gasoline for themselves. And here we are building this case out, please. They're building up this case just like we did in Iraq. Build up the war propaganda. There was no Al-Qaeda in Iraq, and they had nuclear weapons, and we had to go in. I'm sure you supported that war as well. Okay. It's time we quit this. It's time. It's trillions of dollars we're spending on these wars.